Did you know you can support Hugo's Desk in Patreon? Starting as low as $1 per month, your subscription to the channel will give you access to a lot of perks. For example, you can vote in my next video, or help me select the next topics of the channel. You'll have access to our growing Hugo's Desk community with a private Discord channel and a private Facebook group. You can even take part of our monthly Q&As and AMAs. By subscribing to my channel in Patreon, you're not only helping me keeping the channel alive, but you can help make Hugo's Desk better, bigger, and with even more content. And now, on to the video. Thank you so much.
My name is Hugo and welcome to Hugo's Desk. If you haven't seen part 1 or 2 of the video regarding the pre-production and on-set, please click on one of the links on the screen right now. In this section, we're going to discuss the post-production from a 3D point of view.
We're going to have a brief look of some of the references around the CG. Together with Juan Brockhaus, our CG lead of the project, we're going to dive into Houdini to show you how the simulations were made. We're also going to open some of the scenes on Softimage. We're going to show you very briefly how we created the Y depth for the purposes of color correction. Last but not least, we're going to talk about the multiple AOVs that we rendered from XSI to composite the shot inside of Nuke. Let's not waste any more time. This is part 3, CG post-production. So let's start just with the gear and the software that we used. As I usually tend to say, we are pretty agnostic with software, so we tend to use everything we have. This is something we picked up from the mill. Mostly used XSI and Houdini on this project. So it was XSI for the rendering, Houdini for the simulations, and Redshift, which was our first project on Redshift. That we were using Redshift 1 actually, which is a GPU accelerated. So if you guys don't know, you should really check out Redshift's website. We had the pleasure of actually this project, Homefront The Revolution, was actually featured on their showcase, which was great. Redshift has a really good rendering engine that works on multiple 3D applications, so you really should check it out. Very similar to Octane, but we just find that Redshift is giving us a bit better results these days, so I do prefer Redshift. Now, of course, for those of you who don't know, Redshift takes advantage of your graphic cards. Basically, the more graphic cards you have on a computer, the faster the renders become. Some people even have rigs with up to 8 graphic cards inside one computer. I mean, back then we were really blown away by the speed of Redshift. We were using a GTX 980, which of course for these days standards looks ridiculous, but back then, this was in 2015 when we started the project. We finished the project in 2016. A GTX 900 from NVIDIA was quite fast. And we really felt that it was, about 10 times faster than what we used to. Both me and Juan were very used to using Arnold at the mill. And we really thought that without any flickering, we were rendering 2.5K for this project. We really felt it was about 10 times faster. Now, at some point, we actually got a second graphic card so that one could actually render twice as fast. So we got an extra, which was a GTX 900 Ti. This, of course, gave a huge boost. We had about 80% more, power to render. Now, just to give you an idea, these renders were 2.5K, and they were done in one workstation with 2 GTX 900s. Now, we had rendering times of about 2 minutes per frame, which was unbelievable and unheard of doing 2.5K back then on Arnold. And this was with everything. We had global illumination passes, we had depth of field passes, motion blur, displacements, reflections. We had every AOV, which you're going to see a bit later on this video. Now, these are some screen grabs of Softimage. Unfortunately, we were very sad that Softimage was discontinued by Autodesk. It's a very powerful 3D application. Juan Brockhaus was very sad about that. Actually, a lot of the CG leads at the mill were back then, because it was such an astonishing application. It's a shame that it was got kind of like pulled out from Autodesk. But until 2015, it was still probably one of the best CG applications ever, really. I know still artists that still use it to this day. Here's some examples of a lot of the things we did actually in Redshift. We used a lot of the game assets and basically reshaded them in Redshift. But these, of course, are shots that were not used on this specific deconstruction. But in here, you can actually see also examples of using assets from the game as well, like the helicopters. And even on the last shot, we actually used the entire street of the game, which was really good because we were quite, inside the lore of the game because we were very faithful by using the street. But this is the shot we're going to talk about. This is mainly the shot that we're going to deconstruct today, which is the nuclear explosion shot, which had a mixture of assets. We had assets from the game, which were all these little small military facility objects. We had also a lot of stock as well, like the Humvees and also the tanks as well. The ground was all kind of matte painting and procedurally made, and we had some cables and some towers. We had a mixture, really, of assets from the game and also assets that we actually purchase, and of course a few small things that we model ourselves. I keep saying this to everyone. This is a reference actually we used quite a lot. This is from Indiana Jones. I know we already talked about references, but one thing I really wanted to convey here is that this is of course a CG reference. There's nothing wrong with you showing a CG reference, but keep in mind that I noticed that a lot of my students and even my artists sometimes use too much CG references. And even this shot, like this shot, of course, is a composite shot from Jarhead, and it looks beautiful. Yes, it does. But keep in mind that these kind of things, are not reality. They are highly stylized things that were made. For example, look at this nuclear explosion that shows up on Wolverine. Completely done in CG, highly stylized, and really kind of a bit not real. It's nothing wrong for you to use these kind of things, but keep in mind that an explosion that was made like this from a film, this has been, influenced by multiple fronts. You have the director with some opinions, you have the art director, you have the producers of the film, you have so many inputs of creativity inside the project. Our main thing was to look at reality, really, and this is the biggest advice I give you. So this is, of course, a real nuclear explosion, a slow, not stylized, and there's no control or art direction on it. This is it. This is what happens when you have a nuclear explosion, which is great when you look at it. And this can inform you so many ways what things actually happen. This is yet another explosion, which is real as well. This was actually one of the biggest inspirations, especially for this bottom here, for our point clouds of the lower area of our simulations, which you will see in a minute. Juan Brockhaus is going to show you on Houdini how we did it. Don't depend so much in stylized CG for references. This means don't look too much at Avenger films and ILM's work. Don't do that. Look at the Nature Channel. Look at National Geographic. Look at Discovery Channel. Hey, get a camera and go outside and check it for yourself. If you're going to judge how a tree should look like, go and take a photo of a tree. Don't look at CG trees that were made on a film. Now, we're going to hear from Juan Brockhaus. He's going to talk a bit about how we did everything here in Houdini and XSI. You should really check out the work that he has. You can go to Vimeo, to Juan Pablo Brockhaus. He used to be a CG lead at the mill. That's where I met him. Then the two of us together, we became heads of the Nuke compositing department for a while, the two of us together, until he kind of left for Prime Focus to be a CG supervisor. These days he's back in Germany, he's in Hamburg, and he's a CG supervisor over there. And you should really check out his latest work. A lot of his work, of course, is something that I've done together with him, especially Heroes Arena and The Walking Dead and Valkyrie and the crew in Homefront. He's a CG supervisor at this company. I'm sure I'm going to misspell the company. The company is, I guess it's called Sechus, I guess. I don't know. I can't speak German, but you should really check out this company. That's where he does his CG supervision. They have amazing CG work and amazing TV commercials, really. So it's a really nice, inspirational website. But I'm gonna leave you guys for the moment now, and let's hand it over to Juan Brockhaus, and myself as well. I'm going to be in the call, but is going to guide us through XSI and Houdini and some of the work that is done. Now, keep in mind that we did this in 2015 until 2016, so we did the job almost on a year, and of course back then we had the whole thing synced in the server. These days the job was archived, and for us to have it fully functioning, it would really need a lot of work. And especially because certain drivers don't work anymore, certain things don't work anymore on Redshift, on XSI also. XSI doesn't exist anymore. So it's very difficult to license or to even open XSI these days. And for it to work with the graphic card and the drivers is very difficult. So keep in mind that we have a lot of limitations on our video.
Okay, let's take it out. So basically on this, so this is like the one scene of the mushroom, and it basically starts with like having just an emitter, which is on the bottom. That's the emitter here, and from there, this is kind of just creates heat, and this is like a diverger who kind of like pushes the atomic bomb to the side basically. And I'm just going to skip to my cache because as it will take ages. So now I'm loading up the cache like BGO.
So your emitter comes in, and then the diverser is what actually pulls out the donut feeling.
Yeah, I mean the donut kind of happens already because of the fluid kind of the pyro simulation, but I put like a divergent force inside that to push it even further out and to be able to shape it a little bit more than how it was before. So because else it wouldn't be that flat. It would be just much more like a kind of a pikier mushroom really, and this is why I put that in there, just to be able to push it outside and give it a little bit more shape. That's really, so you can see here on the bottom there's the cache coming up, and then when it goes up, so this is just the preparation for the actual for the whole mushroom, because obviously in the shot you see only the final stage of it, like when it's at the end, but obviously because it's a simulation I need to start at the bottom and really let it explode. And then when it gets to that final position, basically, or final shape, then I basically slow down time and simulation time, and then it gets like slowed down, and then it kind of slowly stays in that position. And this is why that's really what I did in Houdini was fairly straightforward, really. And then from there I created VDB files, so which then I exported, and then they were rendered in Arnold in Softimage later.
So it all came from just single mushroom then, and
yeah.
But you took it with different times, didn't you?
No, not the mushroom itself, really. I mean, the mushroom itself, not what I did with different times was then the bottom. Because we had also have this ring of cloud coming towards you, and this is where I also created basically just one element, and this one I cached out as VDB files, and this one I then distributed in the scene and then time offsetted them a little bit so it felt like a bigger kind of ring of smoke coming towards us. Mm-hmm. The mushroom itself is really basically, this is the mushroom basically, and then it's I rendered every second frame and actually did no flow in Nuke to make it slower, and which kind of helped because it also helped getting Ray away with a bit of noise, because it was anyway so slow, and so the O-Flow did a really good job because it was like a very slow movement, so O-Flow was doing a very good job, but it helped like taking out the bit of the noisy rendering, so I didn't have to push the samplings really, really high to get a kind of a noise-free render. Just with the O-Flow, it just smoothed it out a little bit, and because it was in the distance anyway, it was we put like a slight out of focus anyway, just a little touch to it anyway, so this worked out pretty well actually, because I only had my machine.
And so that was like then exported as a VDB, and that's where. That was pretty much it. Like what you did in Houdini, the whole entire other thing was shaded in Redshift and everything else. Then it went into XSI, right?
Yes. The mushroom, I just created this. I can just open up. I mean, you can
the smoke
cut
ring.
here. Yeah, just a smoke ring, just to show you on this one I can actually, if you want, I can show you how it kind of, if you just do the pyrosim. So this is like how this is the actual simulation now going, but this actually will take a lot of time. So this is how it actually looks when it simulates. I can't let it play because it will take another 2 hours now to run through.
Yeah, when it gets
as
really,
you can
really
see,
big.
exactly. When it gets big, it starts to really sim. But this is actually the actual simulation of the Houdini file really. And this one I cached out, and then I rendered it out. And what you could see before was actually the actual cache, which I converted to VDBs. But yeah, so this is like the smoke at the bottom. I mean, this is how I created the ring, basically the emitting ring. I just cut bits of it, and then I transformed it and created like this. So here, this is basically like the emitting for the smoke. So it's just...
okay, so you have like a surface that moves forward, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And from there, basically, I emit the whole smoke, which you then later see. So it goes... I timed that, and then it just goes forward. It has a dispersion, and it has like this turbulence, and from there, it just... the whole smoke rises and creates the whole thing. So actually, it goes out from here. But yeah, and then it goes into the sim here. Then it takes ages. Yeah, okay, now you can't really see a lot, but now because obviously it's a very low-res version of it. But basically that's what happens. So it just crawls along and then the smoke rises, basically. But this is like a really slow, low-res version of whatever. Exactly, so that is kind of like how it looks at the end. But this is like really low-res version of the thing. But you can see like where it's going to be traveling. So this is basically worked out with that emitter, which I created, which basically started as a torus, which I kind of animated going from the from the explosion center, and then I just turbulized it, pushed it down, and deformed it so that I got only this little slice, which then travels along and became basically just the source of my smoke, really, which was then later just simming along and creating the whole ring. And basically I used this part here, this smoke part I cached out as a VDB, and in the 3D scene I used this I think 3 or 4 times. I randomized it a little bit in time, and I also like rotated it a little bit around so that it it didn't look exactly the same. And obviously because then the light was affecting all of those pieces at the same time that didn't look the same, because the cache is just a VDB, a volume cache, but it doesn't have lighting information. It's just the density of the volume and where's heat and where's smoke, but then you actually light it. So even if you have basically the same caches next to each other, if you light them, they will look. You light them all as one big piece, basically. So that's how I save time in simulation and how I reuse that cache, really. But that's the low-res version. So basically here you can see actually the smoke sims. Okay, so this is like the scene, this is basically the Arnold scene where I actually rendering the volume clouds, and this is just the smoke rings, the 3 volumes of the smoke rings, and I have to admit that I can't remember exactly. You can't really see it. That's the thing. You can only it's an OpenVDB at the thing, and it has this Arnold shader. I don't even know whether it's actually going to be rendering, to be honest. Yeah, I can. I basically sample the density from the smoke. It's basically like a classic Arnold volume cloud rendering, and then I just put different gradients to show I took the density and the heat and stuff and remapped this to gradients so that they were then remapped to kind of fire and smoke values, basically. So basically how it worked. This was just a chain test I did. So this is basically the scene. I'll go to main because I think the main was the main. Yeah, so that's the main scene, the whole shot basically with the with everything in it. So this is the scenery actually, how it was set up in Softimage back in the days and rendered in Redshift. Quite a big heavy scene, especially those Humvees here, which are very close to camera. They were pretty geometry heavy, and these grass bits and stuff, they were all done scattered and stuff in Redshift. So they are like little in Redshift in ice, in Softimage ice, they're like little individual grass pieces. I used like the grid as a geometry, as an emitter for the geometry, and then I had those different pieces of grasses which we kind of modeled and textured. And then I could just basically start to distribute them on the grid and change around the amount, whatever we wanted to have. And so I did it.
That rate was the way that you would randomize them around. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is how many there is. Yeah. And then this is like basically like a seed, so they don't emit in the same thing. And what I then also did is that I did like I got like the closest neighbors, so in order to avoid them intersection each other, If you look at them a little bit close, you can see that they don't intersect actually. So they always kind of try to avoid each other a little bit. So I just did it by getting the neighbors and then pushing them always a little bit to the side. So from this from the neighbors, from get the closest position and then reset them again. Okay, so yeah, so this is how I did those little grass bits and stuff, and also the very tiny bits here. These are like pieces of gravel and dirt and grass around. And then you had, obviously, we have the tanks and the Humvees. I think they were assets that we bought.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah, it was.
And then I retextured them and did some texturing work on them and shading work on them, which was fairly straightforward Redshift architectural shading, and then was just like normal maps. Just a diffuse map, then specular maps, normal maps where the diffuse doesn't have anything there, but has some normals in there. If you can see them. And let me just show you So these are like the textures for these Humvees, for example. It's like normals and stuff like this. So I mean, it's fairly straightforward. PBR workflow, still back in the days. The tanks, very similar also, I think, in terms of shading and lighting. They also just got like straightforward, really. Specular, PNG. And then these were the game assets. I think there were a lot of these stuff which were lying around here were actually from the game. They were just game assets I just reused here in this scene also. Like, for example, the concrete barriers. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So those ones, for example, sometimes I just reuse them from other shots, and I just put them inside there, and we just to fill up the whole thing. And okay, these are all these textures from the game assets, but the game assets were also set up in the classic diffuse, normal map, specular, bump, and which I then wired together into Redshift architecture shader, which was using at that time I was using the Redshift architecture because it was Redshift 1.3, something like that. It's one of the first jobs I did in Redshift. So nowadays they have slightly different shaders and stuff. The particles I did, I called them ash. They were done in ice. They were simulated with as ice particles, really. Yeah, so they were an ice simulation, really. I had like a lot of little debris bits, little debris bits I just created. So they were just like random pieces and stuff like this. Pieces of debris, just a very simple shader on it, obviously. So it was just really just a simple gray shading, architectural shader on it, nothing fancy really, because it was so small anyway. So at the end you can see here the whole little debris stuff. And yeah, and this ended up being a nice simulation tree really. So this is not the simulation, this is the cache already. Let me see if I can. So this is a render scene. This is why I brought in just a cache of that thing. So here's basically how I created the ice tree. The simulation really. I had all these. I just create all these points from my emitters, which are basically all these here. So I emit those points already, kind of like I create them already in place where they're kind of going to be ish. So they start basically somewhere where they should be. Mm-hmm. And randomize them and put them there, and then I start simulating them just with some forces and with some good old EM tools, gravity forces, wind force, turbolize, and also obviously I use also obstacles. So I use all of these objects which are highlighted now as simple obstacles to just let them flow around and avoid them and stuff. I didn't use like real rigid body simulation for this. So it's more like they're more like force fields and they just fly around there. So as you can see now. So this is simming live now. See, they're created on the spot basically, and then they get pushed towards the camera, start to avoid all these objects which are there, so they just fly around a little bit so they don't intersect properly. They don't start to get intersected with that. And that's really the simulation scene. So it wasn't done in Houdini, it was done in Softimage Ice, really, because it was really nice to do it like that. And then you can see here. And then they get their turbolize. You can see I don't know if you can actually see this, see how they all come towards camera and stuff. And then I cache this out, as you can see, and then use this in the render scene. So in the render scene, I only use the cache of that simulation, really. And as you can see, these are like just little stand-ins. So these are not the actual real little objects I rendered later. This is just little plates, little squares, which I just used for simulation because it was much quicker. And then in the render scene, I actually replaced them with instances of little debris pieces because so that's how I then did that later.
I mean, I guess I'm going to show that when people see the Nuke scripts with the separation of the keying script, the roto script, the script. It's the same approach you do to 3D, right? Like you have all these separate scenes that then combine themselves all in one final scene, which is for rendering.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. That's correct. In this case, it was the Houdini scenes and this scene and the other ones. So basically, so this is like the RGB fog layer where we used to split up the depth, the heights, and basically like a sideways ramp into one in RG and B. So in red, normally put always the depth, and this basically used by just taking the ray length, which is basically the length of the ray from the camera point of view into the scene. So here it's so the camera is here, as you can see the camera, and you can see some of these cubes. I'm just doing like simplified objects to see it, and the ray depth is from the camera into the scene, so that's a ray depth. And then by just I'm going to show you now here just the red channel so that it's easier to see. So display red. See, by just telling them between 0 and 1, I now basically change the range, resample the range from 0 to 1. So this is where I can just say how depth I want to have the scene. So it's not like it's a normalized depth basically. So this is where it gets then and this color will then be mapped from scalars to a vector, and then the vector gets mapped to the color, and then the objects get the color from that. So this is for the red channel basically, and this is obviously something I always then set up for a scene. So depending on what kind of normalized map we want, I remember that we then just talk, give me it up to this, I need it only for the depth and stuff, and I can use this for the fog and stuff. Then the green we use for the height, and for that there it's called the intersection point vector state, which is basically I think that just a kind of a 3D 2D I don't know to be honest how it which is just the intersection point of the geometry in the scene basically. So it gives you like the point of the geometry. So basically, let's say this point here. So this point it tells you the X, Y, and Z value of that point in the scene, and this obviously then can be reflected, the X, Y, and Z 3 values you can reflect in red, green, and blue, and then I can just take I take just the Y value, the height, and again I just re-ramp that value between the ramp I want, and then I can from there say, okay, I want the height start at 0 up, or let's say I want a height start a bit higher. Oops, let's say 200. So now you can see that this is all constant black, and the actual ramp is only from here to here, because that's basically the height 200 to 300, and if it starts on 0, then you can see that the ramp will go up down to the floor. If I go below the floor, then obviously it will fade even further down, and then with the other end of the range I can tell how high I actually want this ramp to go in the height. And for the blue we just use like a left right thing, and again I use the X value because obviously the scene is looking into the scene. I take the X value of the position and re-ramp that value between, let's say, minus 250 to 200, and then you can see now see minus 250, so you can here see the ramp actually. So this is all 1, and then it goes into black, and depending on where I put these values, I get a smoother or a harsher ramp, which then can be used in Nuke to do certain grades and stuff like this. And this is basically how this shader comes together, and then it renders out. And together it looks a bit funky. When you put then also obviously all the together, you get this image. But in Nuke you split up obviously the channels, and then you use the individual channels for certain fog effects or fadings or whatever you fancy really.
Okay, so here we are in Nuke, and these are every pass we made for this project. I know this sounds a bit strange that there are so many. Keep in mind that because we were working remotely, we decided to make each AOV on a separate EXR. This really helped with the uploading and downloading from Dropbox, because sometimes when you're doing 2.5K resolutions, the EXRs get humongous if you use AOVs inside the EXR. So we didn't do a multipass EXR. And so this is very similar. We have our main render. So this is our beauty, as you can see. And you can kind of see that there's no extra layers. There's only an alpha channel, of course. And this was what you saw when Brockhaus talked about. This is basically the Jeep that we had, the floor. This is just the raw CG with all the assets from both the game and also the assets that we purchased and extra assets we had on the background as well that we modeled up. Now, included on that was, of course, the diffuse lighting, which is nothing more than basically the lighting, the directional light together with the diffuse. We didn't do raw passes, not for everything at least. This is our straight diffuse. The straight diffuse, of course, is just the texturing information. Really helps you if you want to change colors on things, especially if you want to use object IDs. If you kind of use object IDs together with the diffuse filters, you know, you can kind of do things like this. For example, like if I put here using a mask and I use a grade node, and basically let's say here I use the red channel here, I can now affect my shader to a much different level. So you see, now I'm actually tweaking the basic texture that was inside the Humvee's wheel. So this is what I keep saying on my videos. It's a bit like working like a 3D artist. Because I have such a strong background in 3D, for me it's always been like this. For me, compositing and Nuke is an extension of CG. So you should always work like a CG artist, not affecting color corrections directly into the beauty, like so, because I think doing things like that, for example, doing things like this, will really affect the beauty too much, because then you lose all the details on the wheel. So you should always kind of work layer by layer, but I have multiple videos on YouTube that you can see that. There's more object IDs, of course. These are object IDs were all created in XSI. Basic setup of object IDs. Back then, we did not have cryptomats, so that's why you don't see it here. We also have a fog pass. This is the fog pass that I was talking to you guys about and you saw on the video before. We have the red channel, which is a normal fog pass, basically like a depth that we can use for grading. I always have an interlaced fog pass so that I can use it for color correction. Because, you know, the depth of field pass is not interlaced because of the depth of field, because of the nature of depth of field. So this provides a really great way for you to actually do fog. You know, I'm going to do this, of course, when we do the deconstruction of all the compositing. But just to give you an idea, if I use, for example, this here, and I use the red channel here, you can see that I can kind of like use this as my fog. I'm just going to invert that, and you see now I can kind of do atmospheric effects using that pass. Now other things as well, as you saw in the video, the red channel gives you the straight depth interlaced, then the green channel gives you the Y fog, and this gives you like some kind of ground fog. This is really good if you want to do like atmospheric effects with color correction. So we have, of course, the GI. So this is kind of like a fake occlusion, a very old-fashioned way of doing things, but this just helps a lot doing CG to make it more grounded with shadows. Of course, I'll show that on the compositing. We have, of course, the normals. This is actually the normals of the whole shot. Sorry, I was showing the wrong ones. Position, world position for the point cloud. We also have specular light. Specular light, of course, is just the directional reflections. We have the refractions, which is the glass and windows of all the Jeeps. We also have reflections, of course. Need to just bring this up so you can kind of actually see it. These are reflections. You know, Redshift is very similar to V-Ray, so it's a GI-based renderer. So as a GI-based render, here's the global illumination, which is basically the lighting, non-directional light of the scene. Then, of course, we have an emission. There's no emission on this shot, but there were emissions on other shots. That's why the shader is set up. And then last but not least, the depth. Now, the depth can only be seen if you look at it through the depth channel, of course. And it's a completely raw depth. As you can see, the values there on the red channel. This is actually to scale of the CG scene. So these values match the CG scene. And this depth, of course, can either be graded for you to use it, or it can be just plugged in directly into the bouquet plugin directly. Now, we also had to render separately the containers. I'm just going to show you that. This was because we rendered them a bit later in the game. So, of course, we got them a bit later from the game's asset. So we rendered them as a separate object. And of course, we just did the exact same shaders as you saw before. We also had object IDs for the containers, for the crates. We had to put the reflections of the windows separately on the Humvee here because it only came later. We wanted to have like the reflections of the sky on them, so we made it as a separate pass. Whenever you're working, you kind of do extra passes, so you don't have to do the whole thing again. Then we have, of course, the hash. This is the main passive hash that you saw when Brockhaus talk about using ice with Softimage. So this is the full particle system that was flying through. Of course, the particle system is being occluded by the geometry. We also have a fog, ash, and then of course we have actual smoke. So for some reason there's some missing frames on this. I'm not sure why. Perhaps it could be that I haven't downloaded all the frames. I really apologize for this. But as you can see, you can kind of see what it is. This is the full volumetric that was done by Juan on Houdini. So this was the lower smoke that he showed you on Houdini that actually covered the whole scene. Then, of course, we have the actual lower explosion, which is this layer here. And then, of course, we have the mushroom cloud explosion as well. Again, no AOVs on those. They were just pure render. So these are kind of all the passes we have for it. We did 19 versions of the whole thing. And I can't wait to show you how we used all these passes together with the footage from Stellar Studios in the compositing stage. That will be the next video. The next video, part 4, we're going to dive into rotoscoping, prep, compositing, and delivery.
Please don't forget to leave a comment. I would love to know what you think about these videos, and of course, let us know how you did your shots. Our community thrives by sharing knowledge, so we're all so eager to know how you achieve your complicated visual effects shots. Hope you've enjoyed these videos. Thank you so much, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.